Hey guys, it's Amber, and today I am participating in Papercrafters Unite Against Racism. This is an event that Justine Hovey organized, and we have Papercrafters getting together on YouTube, Instagram, and on their blogs to support the never-ending fight for equality, and I'm so honored to be a part of it. Many times I think we want to help and affect change, but we maybe don't know how to get started. So I will have a link to my blog post down below where there will be lots of resources that you can check out in order to get involved and really make a difference. When I was considering what types of projects I wanted to create for this event, the first thing I thought of was the Altenew Better Together stamp set. This has so many sentiments that really speak to the cause that we are supporting today. I'd like to thank Altenew and the other paper crafting companies that I'm associated with, where I feel like this stamp set really echoes their values. I appreciate how inclusive they are of all people, and I feel so blessed to be a part of the paper crafting community. So I have a piece of Simon Says stamp masking paper here. I've cut it to A2 size, so 4¼ by 5½. And I've taken 5 Hero Arts Circle Infinity dies and run it through my die cut machine to create this mask. I'll go ahead and adhere this mask to an A2 size piece of Nina Classic Crust Solar White cardstock, and to be honest, it probably would have been easier if I had cut my mask a little bit larger, but I was cutting it from 8½ by 11 sheets, and I wanted to make sure that I get the most out of it, so I did A2 size, kind of out of habit really. So you can see I'm just smoothing this down. It's a low tack adhesive on the back of the masking paper, so you do have the opportunity to peel it up and reposition it if needed. And then I chose a selection of Altenew inks in Vanilla Cream, Sand Dunes, Rocky Shore, Mocha, and Espresso. Basically what I was shooting for was a bunch of different skin tones, and I wanted to ink blend each of these circles a different color. I thought that this might go well with the sentiments. And originally I was thinking that I would only use 1 sentiment, but you'll see at the end I end up going with 5 sentiments, 1 for each circle. So I've ink blended with the new Altenew ink blending tool. I started with my lightest color, and my goal was to work up to the darkest color, but I accidentally skipped over Sand Dunes, which was the second lightest color. The reason I wanted to start light to dark is because I'm using the same blending tool for all of those. And even though I am wiping off the blending tool in between applications, I do feel like my Sand Dunes ended up a little bit darker than it would have been if I had started with that at the beginning. So basically just trying to prevent cross-contamination of the darker colors into the lighter colors on the brush. So this is Espresso, which is a beautiful, rich, dark brown. I absolutely love it. And then on the glass mat, you can just pull up the excess ink, just wipe it up and put that right onto your project. So here's the Sand Dunes. And like I said, I think this would have been just a touch lighter if I had done this in order lightest to darkest. So now the magic happens as you pull off your mask, and you just want to pull the mask back on itself. Make sure that you go slowly. I mean, I've not experienced masking paper tearing my cardstock in any way. It's a pretty low tack tape, but you can see that it holds down so nicely, and you get a beautiful edge when you ink blend. I really have been enjoying the Altenew ink blending tool. It just blends so beautifully. So here you can see I'm playing around with the stamp set to see which sentiment I want to use, and ultimately I decided to put 1 sentiment in each one of the circles, and I wanted the sentiments kind of peeking out of the circle a little bit, so each one of them overhangs the circle. I'm going to go ahead and stamp all of these at the same time in Obsidian pigment ink. I did stamp our differences twice because I misstamped it just a bit. And then I'll use the Altenew Jet Black ink spray. I take the nozzle out, knock off the majority of the ink back into the bottle, and then I just tap the nozzle onto the project to get some splatter. Here you can see the finished card with unity and diversity. Different is beautiful. Celebrate our differences. Together we can do great things and spread love. And I think these are just excellent messages just in everyday life, and particularly for this event. Here I have the Altenew Artist Watercolor 24 pan set, and I'm using Delectable Delights and Red Cosmos. And I have the Ellen Hudson Full Hearts die here. This is the largest die in the set. along with a piece of Saunders Waterford high white rough watercolor paper. And it's cut to 4¼ by 5½. And I have the blade side up, so the flattest part of the die is laying on the paper. And I'm just using this as a guide. So as I'm dropping in water, so I have, that's probably a number 12 round brush, and it's super saturated. You could see that I had big drops of water fall on my paper, and I'm going to do a wet on wet technique with this. If you have trouble picking up your dye, just use your magnet from your MISTI to pick it up. And I'm going to drop my watercolor pigments into this water spot that I have on my paper. The watercolor pigment is going to stay within that water line. Here I'm just using a pipette of water to rehydrate my watercolor pans. That gets them nice and juicy and rehydrated so that I can pick up high saturation of pigment, which is how I prefer to watercolor. I really like bold and rich colors, so it's not too often that I do soft colored cards. It's usually pretty bold and vibrant. So I'm just dropping in the pigments, and what I plan to do is have the red at the top of the heart with the brown at the bottom, and have these two colors meet in the middle and mix. So I'm going to continue to add pigment until I get the saturation that I'm looking for. And I love the rough watercolor paper. You can see the texture of this paper here, and you can also see it in the pigments. I love how the pigments move on this paper. I feel like they move more than they would on a hot press paper that's really smooth. So if you haven't tried a rough paper before, it might be something you want to try. Or if you really like cold press paper, try the rough paper too and see what you think. So here I have the red Cosmos, and I'm just going to drop that in. And you can see that drop of water had been sitting on my pan for a while. And when I pick up the pigment, it's super saturated because it's nice and hydrated. Here I'll just use the tip of the brush to run it right along the edge of the water that I've already put down in that heart shape. And then I'll pick up the watercolor paper to start mixing those pigments. And you can see I have a lot of pigment and water on the paper. That's going to help aid in the mixing. So I'm just going to fill some of this in. I'll add a little bit more brown, and I'll just kind of continue tilting until I get the right mix. I don't really want to leave any white spots in the middle there. I want it to be filled in all the way. But you will see a variation of color. I'm going to keep the darkest pigments at the very top of the heart and at the tip of the heart down at the bottom. I'm going to keep adding the deeply saturated color because I know that this is going to dry back and it's not going to be as vibrant once it's dry. And then I'll also use the pointed tip of this brush in order to tidy up the point of the heart and any edges. This is a Wonder Forest brush, if you know Dana Fox over on YouTube. I really enjoy her brushes. They're round brushes, but they come to a really sharp point, so you can do detail work even with the largest brush in the set. I let this panel dry overnight. I prefer to let it dry overnight rather than using the heat tool so that it doesn't warp. When you superheat a piece of wet cardstock, the fibers are going to contract and you get more warping. So I've stamped a sentiment from the Better Together set in Obsidian Pigment ink, and then I'm also going to splatter this with the same jet black ink spray. And here you can see the finished card. And I love how it turned out and how those colors mix in the center. I think it's so rich and beautiful, and I'll definitely use this dye-assisted watercolor technique again. I hope you enjoyed these projects today. As I said, I will have a link to my blog post and also Justine Hovey's blog down below. Justine has organized this whole event. She has been amazing and at the forefront of really putting this whole event together. And she'll have additional resources on her blog as well as graphics that you guys can post on your social media accounts to support Papercrafters uniting against racism. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, liking, and ringing that bell so you don't miss any new inspiration. Here's a couple more videos for you before you leave, and I'll see you real soon.